Welcome to today's episode of Table Talk with
the Mercer County ESC.
All right, my friends. This is kind of awkward today because, as you'll notice, I am by myself. And Lindsay's not with me right now, and that's for two reasons. Number one, she's not here yet. But number two, I am completing this assignment, or this podcast as part of an assignment for my doctoral work, which happens to integrate nicely into our new morphology series that Lindsay and I are rolling out in our Table Talk podcast series. So, what we're going to start or what we're going to talk about today is morphology within the content areas, and how morphology has an impact on our instruction just across the board. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is that most secondary content teachers weren't trained to teach reading. And actually, as a matter of fact, as we have discovered over the last 3 years with Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement, secondary ELA teachers haven't even really been trained to teach reading. So when we say teach reading, most of us automatically think that it does belong in that ELA classroom. We picture novel-based instruction, short stories, all of those things that we're used to in our own ELA classrooms within our experiences. However, there's an article by Hall from 2005 that accumulates a century of research that agrees that students benefit from reading instruction across content areas. So I think that we maybe need to modify or sort of think about what reading instruction looks like across content areas. Because telling content area teachers to teach reading without giving them specific tools to do so, I don't blame you. That's a recipe for confusion, especially when you have your own standards to cover, when you have your own state tests to prepare for. So we can integrate morphology instruction into content areas in order to help reading comprehension, but also propel the learning within those content areas as well. And hopefully by the end of my episode here, so I know it's weird without having Lindsay interject here, but in this episode, hopefully by the end, you'll have some tools that it won't just be another thing that you'll have to teach, but it can be something that you integrate in what you're already doing. So, what is morphology and why does it matter? To be honest, I'm not entirely sure where this podcast is going to fall in regards to releasing during our podcast or our morphology series. So, I'm just going to go ahead and do a refresher in regards to what morphology is. So, morphology is the study of morphemes. What are morphemes? Morphemes are the smallest meaningful units of language. And as we do some examples and show some ways that you can integrate into this classroom, it will make perfect sense. A lot of you probably already use morphological awareness. Actually, you probably don't use morphological awareness because morphological awareness is consciously paying attention to morphemes, but a lot of us already use morphology to figure out words that we don't know. We just don't realize we're doing it. So the goal that we are doing in the content area classrooms are to give the students tools to do this consciously, because your good readers, they're doing this unconsciously. They're doing it without realizing it. And what I love about morphology is it will help all students. So employing this within your content area classroom, your good readers will become better readers because they will start to do this consciously, which will allow them to unlock even more vocabulary they hadn't understood before. But more importantly, for your struggling readers, this is a non negotiable. So think of morphemes like a puzzle piece: the roots, the prefixes, the suffixes. When students learn to break those down and into meaningful parts, they're not just memorizing vocabulary words anymore, because as a secondary ELA teacher by trade, I know vocabulary was the bane of my existence. Students using rote memorization to memorize words for a test, but they would never be able to use them. And then once that test was over, a lot of times they didn't even remember what the word meant. And I know that that's a struggle that content area teachers find as well. So an article by Sedita from 2018 tells us that after third grade, most of our academic vocabulary is morphologically complex. And what does that mean? That means that the English language is morphophonemic. So that means that words are made up phonetically and also morphologically. So in those early grades, we're teaching them phonics. What are letters? What do those letters say? How do we orthographically understand those sounds connected with the code? And then the morphological piece is sometimes, like, think of the word psychology. That word really can't be decoded phonetically. However, if you know the morphological parts of that, psychology, You can then figure out the meaning of that word, and it will also help you with spelling as well. So another study by Levesque, Breadmore, and Deacon from 2021 goes even farther. And they argue that despite decades of research showing how morphology supports reading instruction, most models of literacy development really undervalue this role. And I think that we're starting to see this locally, even in so many of our area districts are starting to use morphology, and it's really starting to unlock some understanding of words for students. So they've even created a morphological pathways framework in order to understand how morphology connects to that phonological and orthographical processing. So basically, too long didn't read. Morphology is a powerhouse, and we're not using it enough to unlock some of those tools of literacy for our students. So, again, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, a lot of the times when we are talking to content area teachers, we get comments like, I teach science, not spelling, or I'm really just trying to get my kids to pass the American history state test. And man, are we sensitive to that because the pressures um, to teach your content and to have success on your state test, man, that pressure is so tight. And that's absolutely fair. But what's interesting is there's a study by Luso and Degulo from 2011 that says teaching reading is not abandoning your content or your subject. It's helping your students access your content through better comprehension. So you're not just teaching them what to read, you're actually teaching them how to understand what they read within your subject area. I remember when I was in high school, I had a science teacher who told me, you're not going to read science text the same way that you read novels. That was reading instruction. So I also think we can kind of shift our mindset in regards to what reading instruction looks like. It's not asking you to add things onto what you're doing, it's actually supplementing these tools and skills and strategies for your students to make them better readers within your content area. So, as Birkins and Yates from 2024 emphasizes, we're not asking you to do an overhaul, right? You're not going to adopt a new curriculum and have to suddenly become a teacher of reading as well. You're going to embed those moments that help students become word detectives. And I think that that's the really cool part about this. Even as an adult, I've started in the last 3 years, I'm a secondary ELA teacher by trade. So I didn't understand a lot of these components of language as well until 3 years ago. When I had to do some Ames course pathways in order to be a facilitator for dyslexia. And I've always considered myself a pretty decent reader. But becoming morphologically aware has really enhanced what I've done. And it's made me look at words differently, even in a doctoral program. Like I said, what's really cool about this, and I've already mentioned this before, is it's going to propel your successful readers even farther. It's a non negotiable for our struggling readers, but another subset that we've seen locally, we've seen a lot more English language learners come into our districts. And we know that's tough. And we want to provide them with the best academic preparedness that we can. But it's really tough. Morphology can be a component that can really help EL students. Bratley et al. From 2022 conducted a meta analysis of 43 studies and found that language minority students lag behind their peers, especially in inflectional morphology. So these are things like verb tense, pluralization, and you probably noticed this just anecdotally when you're communicating with people whose English is not their first language. So morphology and focused instruction helps bridge that gap. So when you think about it, if you take the word dog, dog is a singular word and it has meaning. Dog is a morpheme. When we take an S and we add it to the end of dog, we now have dogs. That word has two morphemes. If you are morphologically aware, you know that that S is not just some little letter that we add to the end of that three-letter word. That actually changes the meaning from going from one dog to multiple dogs. I put two up. That's not right. It could be 100 dogs, right? So providing this with students whose native language is not English, this gives them maybe another checkbox to go, was that right? No, I know these morphemes. I know that I need to add a plural S in order to be talking about more than one dog. So, like I mentioned, for our successful readers, morphology is huge to help them become even better readers. For our struggling readers and our EL students, morphology is, in fact, a non negotiable. Schwartz from 2023 talks about a ninth grade science teacher who began integrating morphology work And she saw her students, especially those struggling readers, start to access complex text with more confidence. Because this is another part that when we're talking about secondary literacy, especially in the content areas, sometimes the biggest beast that we're fighting is students' relationship with reading. You think about this, if students, started in third grade, I mean, obviously they started in preschool with phonics and things like that. But as students are getting older and they're beginning to read and their peers are beginning to read, those gaps become apparent. And I talk about this all the time. I don't golf. I don't golf because I'm not good at golf, and it's not fun to do things you're not good at. So guess how much better I'm getting at golf? I'm not getting any better because I'm not doing it, right? And it's funny that as adults, we all of us have these things. For me, it's golf. And they're things we choose not to do because we're not good at that. But yet we're floored when secondary students don't read, or they choose not to read. Maybe they haven't been good at it. Maybe they haven't been given the skills that they need to do that well. But one thing to note, because of course, I think with literacy instruction, we have to be very, very careful that we're not looking for a magic bullet. So Galler et al. From 2020, they do offer a little bit of nuance to this morphology discussion. And I think that just with everything else in the science of reading, this is a science, right? And we know that as we get more information and more research is done, we'll find out more and more and more as time progresses. But they showed that morphology instruction helps students to code unfamiliar words and recognize word parts. However, improvements in overall reading comprehension were limited. So that doesn't mean that morphology is not effective in improving reading comprehension. Of course, it doesn't mean that. However, it does remind us that all of these pieces, phonics, morphology, syntax, semantics, all these things that we talk about when we talk about the science of reading, they're not magical, right? So we have to be doing all of these moving parts together to improve that reading comprehension. So it's important to note that morphology, this is a tool. This is not a fix all. You're not going to suddenly see everybody becoming lovely, fluent, amazing readers just from teaching morphology. However, when it's embedded consistently and explicitly, it will help your students develop their skills to infer, connect, retain academic vocabulary. And more importantly, like we said earlier, it will help with their confidence, man. That's what's so important for students is like I said, with my son, he is having so much fun unpacking these words and figuring it out. And guess what? He wants to read because he's being successful and he's cracking this code. So I think that's important for us to remember as we're using morphology. This is not some magic bullet. This is a tool that we're giving students in their toolbox to help them become better readers. So I know what you're thinking. I've been sitting here for 13 minutes listening to you yap on and on about how important morphology is. What do I do about it? Which is a great question. So I'm going to give you these tools that you could employ tomorrow or today if you wanted to. Because these tools, like I said, I don't want you to think about this as something that you're doing in addition to the work you're doing. This is something you can embed into work you're already doing. Maybe modify some worksheets or modify your bell ringers, things that you can do just really quick and easy and find out what works for you. So the Birkin and Yates article from 2024 that I mentioned, they have a tool that you could use or a strategy that you could use in your instruction, and that's simply word of the week. Some of you may already do this with vocabulary, which is a good idea in theory, but we know that rote memorization, that doesn't work, and it causes so much frustration for us. So what word of the week looks like is you pick one morpheme a week. So if you are a science teacher, maybe your morpheme is bio. Or maybe TION, the suffix TION is what you use as a social studies teacher. You're going to talk about it. You're going to display it. You're going to refer back to it as you're reading texts within your class and you see that morpheme come up. You're going to highlight it, right? You're going to talk to them about it. Because remember, your goal is to foster word consciousness. Again, this is not a magic bullet. You're just getting them to start to see these patterns in words. Another maybe more formal way that you could do this, Sadida 20 from 2018 talks about using word matrices. And I'll show a visual. I'll have a visual up here. If you're driving, please don't look at the visual. I'll add some links at the end so that you can also find these later on. But these are charts that let students see how one root, like struct, can combine with different prefixes and suffixes. So for example, you have construction, destruction, infrastructure. You can see all of these words and you can see how the morpheme struct, the role it plays in each of those words. So if you really start to unpack this and you think we're giving students a much higher chance of being able to figure out words that maybe they wouldn't have been able to figure out before. So let's say you are a social studies teacher and you have taught the morpheme struct. A student encounters the word infrastructure in their text. They don't know what that word means, right? They're not sure what that word means. However, in the context of the sentence, and maybe you taught them what struct means, they may have at least a tool that will allow them, with the context of the sentence and their knowledge of that morpheme struct, they may now have the ability to be able to figure out what infrastructure means in the context of that sentence. Another critical component that I think sometimes we forget about as secondary teachers are non-examples. So you can show students that don't follow, or you can show students words that don't follow the rule. So for example, let's say we're talking about the morpheme ing, which I know is very simple, but it's the easiest way to teach these non-examples. You as content area teachers who are experts in your field, you will probably do a much better a much better job of finding non-examples. But when you think about the word run, and then we add ing, we won't talk about the spelling rule about doubling the n right now. We don't need to blow anybody's mind. Um, but when you take the word run, you add ing, you have running. We have two morphemes in that word, run, and then the suffix ing. However, when we have the word king, we have an ing in that word, but we only have one morpheme. Our morpheme is king. So giving students non-examples allows them to see, hey, and again, this is why it's not a magic bullet. Just because I see ing does not mean that we've added another morpheme there, and that's really important for students. And then obviously I alluded to this during the word of the week, but opportunity teaching, right? If you see a word that may be complex in your content area, so for example, the word photosynthesis, there's a really cool tool that I'll link. It's called Edym Online, and it allows you to break down words by their morphemes. Because I know one of the other hesitancies regarding teachers of all content areas and all the way down into the elementary is like some of this stuff we don't even know and we weren't even taught. So you can use that as teaching moments. You don't know what the word photosynthesis is? Cool. Let's jump on Edym Online and see what morphemes make up that word. So for example, if we used photosynthesis, we have photo meaning light, synthesis meaning putting together. So photosynthesis, I mean, what are plants doing? They're putting together that light to make energy, right? So again, you can see how this becomes a tool. Students no longer have to memorize a bunch of vocabulary words, or even let's take it one step farther. They're taking the biology state test and they're freezing. They're stressed, they're nervous, they can't remember what photosynthesis is. Well, guess what? They no longer have to memorize what photosynthesis is. They can go, oh, I remember what photo means. I can remember what synthesis means. Now they've unlocked that word during the test. And then one final way you can embed this into your instruction that you're already doing, you can give them something called cloze sentences, CLOZE. And you'll give the students a sentence with a blank. So basically, it will say the blankologist studied ancient bones. And then you'll have them plug in the morpheme. So the archaeologist studied ancient bones. Now they can talk about archae. What does that mean? Ologist. What does that mean? Right? So they can start to break down some of those words into meaningful parts, because I'm only going to say this one more time because I'm probably driving you bonkers, but this is a tool. So this is not going to suddenly create amazing proficient readers, but it's going to give them a tool in their toolbox that will give them some access to words in your content area that maybe they never had access to before. So I know I really appreciate you guys listening to me for 20 minutes without Lindsay. I know it's probably not nearly as entertaining without the both of us, but I hope you were able to at least pull some things from this 20 minutes that will allow you to kind of employ some things in your classroom that will really help your students become better readers. Because here's the thing. You do a lot of this instinctively. Most of us became teachers because we were good at school. So chances are you were one of those readers who was able to pick up on some of these morphemes subconsciously. But when you explain terms in your classroom, pause on some of those roots that are common within your classroom. Because what's really cool is we're doing this morphology work. And as I'm looking at it as a secondary teacher, so many of these roots live in our content areas. So it really is a really cool moment for you to be able to intentionally and explicitly explain these words to students in a way that really makes them more interesting. And again, it's not about adding more preparation for you or, you having to add something else to a curriculum you're doing. It's maximizing those moments. And sometimes they're random moments that build that word consciousness for students, because the research shows that morphology is one of the most effective, efficient ways to grow vocabulary across disciplines. So whether you're in a science lab, art room, gym, you can really help students unlock the meaning of words one morpheme at a time. So I really appreciate you hanging out with me, and only me. I promise Lindsay will be on the next podcasts, so you can be entertained again. But I really appreciate you hanging out. And you know where to find me. If you have any questions regarding embedding morphology instruction into the content areas, we'll be having some professional development. We have a literacy summit this summer that's open to everybody. So please, please, if you have any questions about employing this within your classroom, you know where to find me. And until then, have a wonderful day.
Welcome to today's episode of Table Talk with
The Mercer County ESC.